Lieutenant Chris stood at the front of the lecture hall and looked at the sea of alien faces staring back at him. 200 cadets from 40 different species filled the tiered seats. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few glowed faintly in the dim light. None of them looked happy to see him. This was his first day as an exchange instructor at the Galactic Military Academy. The massive station called Zenith 7 orbited a neutral world far from Earth. Here, the Coalition trained its future officers. Humanity had joined the Coalition only 5 years ago, after first contact changed everything. Most species still saw humans as newcomers who barely knew how to leave their own solar system. Chris placed a long metal object on the table in front of him. The M9 Gauss rifle gleamed under the overhead lights. He had carried weapons like this one through jungles, deserts, and frozen mountains back on Earth. It had never failed him. "Good morning," Chris said, his voice carried clearly through the room. "I am Lieutenant Chris. I will be teaching you about human weapon systems." A ripple of sound moved through the cadets. It was not quite laughter, but close enough. Chris kept his expression neutral. He had expected this. In the third row, a massive figure shifted in a reinforced seat. Was standing over 7 feet tall even when sitting down. His species had natural armor plating and incredible strength. They had been warriors for thousands of years, long before humans discovered fire. Raised one thick arm. "Instructor, is that a kinetic weapon?" "Yes," Chris said. "It fires solid projectiles using electromagnetic acceleration." The hall erupted in noise. Cadets turned to each other, mandibles clicking and translator devices buzzing with dozens of languages. Chris waited for them to settle down. Near the front, a slender figure with pale blue skin leaned toward her neighbor. Was a telepathic species known for their advanced minds. Chris could not hear her thoughts, but he saw the look on her face. It was the same look people gave to museum pieces. "Forgive me, instructor," said, his voice booming. "But are you seriously teaching us about kinetic projectiles? We stopped using such primitive technology 2,000 years ago." "That is interesting," Chris said calmly. "Humans still use them." "Because you are young," another cadet called out. "You have not discovered better methods." Chris picked up the rifle and held it at his side. "What weapons do your species use?" A dozen hands shot up. Chris pointed to a cadet near the back. "Plasma lances," the cadet said proudly. He was like, "We can vaporize a target at 500 meters." "Energy disruptors," another added. She was from a species Chris did not recognize. "They break down molecular bonds." "Gravity wells," a third cadet said. "They crush anything caught inside." Chris nodded to each one. "Those are impressive weapons, very advanced." "Then why do humans still throw rocks?" asked. Several cadets laughed openly this time. Chris set the rifle back on the table. "Tomorrow, I will demonstrate this weapon's capabilities. You are all invited to attend. After that, you can decide if it is primitive." Stood gracefully. Her voice was soft but carried a sharp edge. "Instructor, I mean no disrespect to your species, but we have energy shields that can stop any physical projectile. We have weapons that strike at the speed of light. What can your rifle possibly show us that we have not already surpassed?" "You will see tomorrow," Chris said simply. The lecture continued for another hour. Chris explained the basic principles of electromagnetic propulsion and showed diagrams of the rifle's internal systems. Most cadets looked bored. A few took notes out of politeness, but their expressions said they were wasting their time. When the class ended, the cadets filed out in groups. Chris heard fragments of conversation as they passed. "A toy gun for a toy species. They still live on one planet. What do they know about real warfare? I heard their world wars killed millions. With primitive weapons like that, no wonder." Chris began packing his materials. Another human entered the lecture hall from the side door. Lieutenant Amy was an engineer and Chris's colleague in the exchange program. She had been teaching a class on human ship systems in the next room. "That sounded rough," Amy said. She leaned against the table. "I could hear them laughing through the wall." "They think we are primitives," Chris said. He carefully placed the rifle in its case. "Can you blame them? Most of these species have been spacefaring for. We have been in space for less than 200 years. That does not make our weapons useless." Amy smiled. "I know that, you know that, but they will not believe it until they see it." "Then I will show them." That evening, Chris prepared the demonstration range. The facility was impressive, with targets set up at various distances and armored walls to contain weapons fire. He requested specific materials from the Academy's supply depot: battle armor, a shield generator, several types of metal plating. The supply officer, a multi-armed being from a species Chris could not pronounce, looked confused by the requests. "These are expensive items, Instructor. What do you need them for?" "Target practice," Chris said. The supply officer's eyes widened, but he provided the materials. Admiral visited the range while Chris was setting up. He was tall and thin, with skin that shifted colors based on his mood. Right now, it was showing shades of concern. "Lieutenant," the Admiral said, "I have heard about tomorrow's demonstration. Many cadets are planning to attend." "Good," Chris said. "The more witnesses, the better. I worry that you are setting yourself up for failure. If your weapon does not perform well, it will reflect poorly on Earth's contribution to the Coalition." Chris finished adjusting a target stand. "With respect, Admiral, I am not concerned about that." "Why not?" "Because my weapon will perform exactly as designed. Whether they understand that is up to them." The Admiral's skin flickered yellow, which Chris had learned meant uncertainty. "They are very proud of their military tradition. They believe their technology is the most advanced in the galaxy. You are challenging both species tomorrow." "I am not challenging anyone," Chris said. "I am simply showing them what human weapons can do." After the Admiral left, Chris loaded different types of ammunition into sealed containers. Standard rounds with tungsten carbide cores, armor-piercing rounds with depleted uranium, EMP rounds designed to disrupt electronics, explosive rounds for soft targets. Each type had a specific purpose. Humans had learned long ago that one weapon could not solve every problem. Flexibility was key. Amy found him an hour before midnight. "You should rest. Big day tomorrow." "I am almost done." "They are placing bets, on how badly the demonstration will go." Chris closed the last ammunition case. "What are the odds?" 10-1 that you will be embarrassed. 20-1 that you will request a transfer off the station within a week." "Those are terrible odds." Amy laughed. "For them, maybe. I put money on you." Chris smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible, but it was there. "You might actually make a profit." "That is not why I did it. I did it because I have seen what you can do with that rifle." They have not. Back in his quarters, Chris lay on his bunk and thought about Earth. His home world was classified as a death world by Coalition standards. The gravity was higher than most planets. The atmosphere was more corrosive. The wildlife was more dangerous. Humans had evolved in an environment that constantly tried to kill them. Every predator on Earth was faster than humans, stronger than humans, better armed with claws and teeth and venom, but humans were still the dominant species. Not because they were superior, but because they refused to give up. They made tools, they worked together, they adapted. The rifle sitting in its case across the room represented 200,000 years of that adaptation. From sharpened stones to arrows to gunpowder to electromagnetic rails. Each step forward had been driven by necessity. Humans needed to kill things that were bigger and more dangerous than they were. The aliens would learn that tomorrow, or they would not. Either way, Chris would show them the truth. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy the same way it earned its place on Earth, through determination, innovation, and the refusal to accept defeat. The firing range was packed beyond capacity. What started as a few curious cadets had grown into a spectacle. Over 500 beings crowded the observation deck, which was designed for maybe 200. Word had spread through the academy like wildfire. The primitive human was going to demonstrate his toy gun. Chris stood on the range floor, alone except for his rifle and the ammunition cases. Above him, the crowd pressed against the reinforced glass. He could see in the front row, surrounded by other cadets. They were laughing and pointing. Stood nearby, her expression one of polite boredom. Admiral watched from the instructor's platform with several senior officers. His skin showed colors that Chris had not seen before, probably embarrassment mixed with concern. Amy's voice came through Chris's earpiece. She was in the control room managing the range systems. "You have got quite an audience. Are you ready?" "Ready," Chris said quietly. He picked up the M9 Gauss rifle and checked it with practiced movements. Magazine loaded, safety off, scope calibrated. The weapon felt comfortable in his hands, like an extension of his own body. "First demonstration," Chris announced. His voice carried through the range speakers. "Standard ammunition against a steel plate at 100 meters. He raised the rifle to his shoulder, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The weapon made a sharp crack as it fired. Downrange, the steel plate rang like a bell. A clean hole appeared in the center, perfectly round. The crowd barely reacted. A few cadets glanced at each other. Most looked disappointed. His voice boomed through the observation deck speakers. He had activated the audience communication system. "Is that all? My plasma lance can vaporize that plate completely. Shall I show you?" Chris lowered his rifle. "Go ahead." The range master opened a second firing position, descended from the observation deck with several other cadets following him. He carried his weapon with obvious pride. The plasma lance was nearly 6 feet long, with power cells running along its length. It hummed with barely contained energy. Took position, aimed at an identical steel plate, and fired. The lance released a bolt of superheated plasma that struck the target dead center. The plate did not just get a hole in it. The entire thing glowed white-hot and melted into slag. The edges dripped molten metal onto the range floor. The crowd erupted in cheers. Cadets from dozens of species applauded and shouted encouragement. Raised his lance in triumph, then turned to Chris with a superior smile. "That is a real weapon, human, not a toy that makes small holes." Chris nodded. "Very impressive. The heat output alone must be tremendous." 15,000 degrees at point of impact," said proudly. "How many shots can you fire before the weapon needs to recharge?" Smile faltered slightly. 23 shots, then the power cells need 40 minutes to cool and recharge." "I see, thank you for the demonstration." Chris turned back to his ammunition cases. "Now let me show you the specialty rounds." Some cadets had started leaving, assuming the show was over. Chris's voice stopped them. These rounds were developed for specific combat scenarios, each one designed to defeat a particular type of defense. He loaded a different magazine into his rifle. First, armor-piercing rounds against battle armor. A suit of armor stood mounted on a stand downrange. It was the same type wore into battle. The armor was legendary throughout the Coalition for being nearly impenetrable. Kinetic weapons supposedly bounced off it like toys. Chris aimed carefully. The rifle cracked again. The armor rang with a deep, hollow sound. Then it fell backward off the stand. The crowd went silent. Chris activated a display screen that showed the armor in close-up. The depleted uranium core had punched completely through the chest plate, through the ballistic gel dummy inside, through the back plate. The round was embedded in the concrete wall behind the target. Stared at the screen. His mandibles moved, but no sound came out. "The round travels at 3 kilometers per second, Chris explained. "The depleted uranium core is denser than almost any armor plating. It does not matter how thick the armor is. Physics does the rest." His voice cut through the silence. "Energy shields would stop such a round. Kinetic barriers are standard on our ships and armor." Chris loaded another magazine. "That brings us to the second specialty round, electromagnetic pulse ammunition." Downrange, Amy activated a shield generator. The air shimmered as the energy barrier formed, a glowing dome of blue light. Coalition forces used these shields on everything from personal armor to capital ships. Chris fired 3 rounds in quick succession. Each one struck the shield and detonated with a flash of white light. The shield flickered, weakened, and died. The generator sparked and went dark. "Each round carries a compact EMP device," Chris said. "On impact, it releases an electromagnetic pulse that overloads shield generators and electronics. Once the shield is down," he fired a standard round. It struck the now unprotected generator and shattered it into pieces. The crowd was no longer laughing. Hundreds of eyes stared at the human on the range floor. An instructor activated his communicator. "Those are controlled conditions. What about moving targets in actual combat?" Chris smiled slightly. "An excellent question." Amy released 6 drones from their hangar. They shot into the air, flying in random patterns. Each one moved at different speeds and altitudes, simulating enemy fighters. "Full automatic mode," Chris announced. He switched a selector on the rifle. "Engaging." The rifle came alive in his hands. It fired in controlled bursts, the electromagnetic rails cycling faster than any traditional weapon. Chris tracked the first drone, led it by a fraction of a second, and fired. The drone exploded. He moved to the second target without pausing. 12 seconds later, all 6 drones were falling in pieces. The observation deck was absolutely silent now, even had stopped talking. Chris ejected the magazine and held it up. 60 rounds fired, magazine still half full, total capacity is 120 rounds. He paused to let that sink in. Most energy weapons I have seen carry 20 to 30 shots before needing recharge. This magazine is good for another 60 rounds, and I can reload in under 3 seconds. Admiral descended to the range floor. His skin showed colors Chris had learned meant serious concern. "Lieutenant, what is the effective range of that weapon?" "It depends on the round type and scope used, sir. With standard ammunition and proper optics, we have kills at 2,400 meters. The Admiral's skin went completely gray. 2.4 kilometers. "Yes, sir. In space combat with no atmospheric interference, the effective range increases significantly. We have tested rounds that remained lethal at over 10,000 kilometers. Energy weapons lose effectiveness beyond 500 meters, the Admiral said quietly. "Yes, sir, the beam disperses over distance. A solid projectile does not have that problem." Approached slowly, his earlier arrogance had vanished. "Instructor, I owe you an apology. I called your weapon a toy. I was wrong." "You were not entirely wrong," Chris said. "Compared to your plasma lance, my rifle is simpler. It has fewer components. It requires no power cells, but simple does not mean primitive. It means reliable." Join them on the range floor. "I do not understand. Why did your species not pursue energy weapons? Every advanced civilization develops them." Chris set the rifle down gently. "Because humans learned to fight on a death world. Our planet is harsher than most. Higher gravity, more dangerous weather, more aggressive predators. For 200,000 years, humans had to kill things that were bigger, faster, and stronger than we were." He picked up a standard round and held it up. "This is what we learned. Make a weapon that is simple enough to use in any condition, reliable enough to work when you are wounded and exhausted, powerful enough to stop an enemy that outmatches you in every way. Energy weapons are impressive, but they need power sources. They overheat. They leave energy signatures that enemies can track." "A bullet does not overheat," Amy said from the control room. "It does not need charging. It does not stop working in extreme cold or heat. It just needs to be pointed at the target and fired." Chris loaded a new magazine. "Every human weapon is designed with one assumption, that we will face enemies superior to ourselves. Because on Earth, that was always true. We expected to fight bigger predators, so we made weapons that did not care how big the predator was." Admiral looked at the shattered remains of the armor. "How many types of specialty rounds do you have?" 15 that are currently in production. Another 20 in development. We have rounds designed for underwater combat, for zero-gravity environments, for urban warfare where you need to shoot through walls. Explosive rounds, incendiary rounds, tracking rounds that adjust their trajectory mid-flight. And you can fire all of them from the same weapon. "Yes, sir, that is the advantage of a kinetic system. Change the magazine and you change the weapon's function." The Admiral turned to address the crowd. "I am calling a special session tonight. Mandatory attendance for all senior cadets and instructors. Lieutenant will give a full briefing on human weapons philosophy." He looked back at Chris. "If you are willing." "Of course, sir." As the crowd dispersed, Chris noticed the change in how they looked at him. No more smirks, no more dismissive glances. They watched him with the cautious respect usually reserved for dangerous things. Lingered after most others had left. "When you said humans expect to fight superior enemies, you meant that, did not you?" "Yes. We have always been the strongest, the biggest. We never had to think like prey." Chris started packing his equipment. "Humans were prey for most of our history. Then we learned to make tools. That changed everything." "Could you teach me to think like that? Like a prey animal that became a predator?" Chris looked at the massive alien warrior. "That is what tonight's briefing is about. Not just the weapons, the mindset that created them." Nodded slowly and left. Amy joined Chris on the range floor. "That went better than expected." They are starting to understand, but understanding is only the first step. "What is the second?" Chris picked up his rifle and checked it one final time. Respect. Real respect. Not fear, not grudging acknowledgement, but actual respect for what humans had to overcome to get here. He looked up at the observation deck where cadets from 40 species had watched their assumptions shatter. Tonight, I will tell them about Earth, about a world that tried to kill humanity for 200,000 years, about how we survived not by being stronger, but by refusing to stay down when we were struck. The lecture hall was more crowded than it had been that morning. Every seat was filled, and dozens of beings stood along the walls. This was not just cadets anymore. Senior officers from every coalition species had arrived. Even some ship captains who happened to be docked at Zenith 7 had come to hear the humans speak. Chris stood at the podium with his rifle resting on the table beside him. Behind him, a massive display screen waited for his presentation. Admiral sat in the front row, his skin cycling through colors that suggested he was very interested in what Chris had to say. "Thank you all for coming," Chris began. "This morning I demonstrated what human weapons can do. Tonight I want to explain why they work the way they do. To understand that, you need to understand Earth." He activated the display. An image of Earth appeared, blue and white and green, hanging in the blackness of space. "This is my home world. To human eyes, it is beautiful. To coalition standards, it is classified as a death world, Class 9 on the habitability scale." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Class 9 meant extremely hostile to most forms of life. Earth's gravity is 1.4 times galactic standard. The atmosphere contains high levels of oxygen, which is corrosive to many species. The weather systems are violent. Hurricanes that span thousands of kilometers. Tornadoes that can level entire cities. Temperature ranges from 50 below zero to 50 above, depending on location and season. The display changed to show various Earth animals: a lion, a bear, a crocodile, a shark. The wildlife evolved to be apex predators. These creatures have claws that can tear through flesh, teeth that can crush bone, venom that can kill in minutes, natural armor, camouflage, speed that humans could never match. Raised her hand. "Then how did your species survive? You have no natural weapons." Chris nodded. "Exactly. Humans have no claws, no fangs, no venom, no thick hide or shells. We cannot run as fast as most predators. We cannot see as well. Our sense of smell is weak compared to other hunters." "Then you should have died out," said. "Many species did. Earth's history is filled with extinctions, hundreds of millions of years of life competing and dying, but humans had two advantages." Chris held up one finger. "Intelligence," then a second finger. "Endurance." The display showed early humans hunting across a savanna. 200,000 years ago, human ancestors learned to make tools. Sharpened stones became knives and spear points. We could not outrun a deer, but we could chase it for hours until it collapsed from exhaustion. We would track our prey for days, wearing it down, because humans can regulate body temperature through sweating. Most animals cannot do that. "Persistence hunting," an instructor said. "I have read about this." Yes, but tools alone were not enough. A lion is still faster and stronger than any human, so we had to be smarter. We learned to work in groups. We learned to use terrain to our advantage. We learned to set traps and ambushes. The display shifted to show human history progressing. Stone tools became bronze weapons. Bronze became iron. Iron became steel. Every step forward was driven by necessity. We needed to kill things that could kill us. When a predator had thick hide, we made sharper spears. When that was not enough, we learned to throw the spears from a distance. When throwing was not enough, we invented the bow and arrow. "This is all ancient history," an officer said. "What does it have to do with modern weapons?" Chris smiled. "Everything, because the principle never changed. Humans always assumed we would fight enemies superior to ourselves." He brought up an image of a medieval castle. "When humans fought each other, we built walls, so we invented siege weapons to break the walls. When armor became too thick for swords, we invented crossbows that could punch through plate metal. When crossbows were too slow, we invented gunpowder." The display showed the evolution of firearms: muskets, rifles, machine guns. 1,500 years ago, humans discovered chemical propulsion. We learned to use explosions to push metal projectiles at high speeds. This changed warfare completely. Now, a single human could kill an armored knight from 100 meters away. Size and strength mattered less. Accuracy and tactics mattered more. leaned forward. But you have had for 200 years. Why did you not develop energy weapons in that time? We did, Chris said. Humanity has built lasers, plasma rifles, and particle beam weapons. We tested all of them extensively. Then why do you still use kinetic weapons? Chris picked up his rifle. Because in testing, kinetic weapons proved more effective in real combat conditions. Let me explain why. He brought up a comparison chart on the display. Energy weapons require massive power sources. A plasma rifle needs power cells that weigh 3 kilograms and provide 25 shots. My rifle uses magazines that weigh half a kilogram and provide 120 shots. In extended combat, which weapon gives you better endurance? The audience was silent, calculating. Energy weapons generate enormous heat. After sustained fire, they must cool down or risk damaging their own systems. Kinetic weapons generate minimal heat by comparison. I can fire hundreds of rounds without worrying about overheating. Amy stood up from her seat near the back. Energy weapons also leave signatures that enemies can track. Plasma generates radiation. Lasers leave ionization trails in atmosphere. A kinetic round is just metal moving fast. It is much harder to trace back to the shooter. Chris nodded his thanks. There is also the matter of range and accuracy. Energy beams over distance. Atmospheric conditions affect them. A kinetic round follows a predictable ballistic path. Once you account for gravity and wind, hitting a target at long range becomes a matter of mathematics. He fired his rifle at a target 200 meters downrange. The round struck exactly center. Energy weapons lose effectiveness past 500 meters in atmosphere. This rifle remains lethal at ranges over 20 times that distance. Stood gracefully. I understand the technical advantages now, but you said this is about philosophy, not just specifications. What is the philosophy behind human weapons? Chris set the rifle down carefully. The philosophy is simple. Humans expect to lose. We plan for the worst possible scenario. We design our weapons assuming the enemy will be bigger, stronger, more advanced, and more numerous than we are. He let that statement hang in the air for a moment. Every human military doctrine begins with the assumption that we are outmatched. So we compensate through preparation, adaptability, and refusal to surrender. When we encounter armor we cannot penetrate, we do not give up. We make harder bullets. When enemies use shields, we make EMP rounds. When enemies hide behind walls, we make explosive rounds that bring the walls down. The display showed human soldiers in various combat situations. Jungles, deserts, Arctic conditions, urban ruins. Human soldiers are trained to fight in any environment. Underwater, in vacuum, in zero gravity, in extreme heat or cold. We train for situations where equipment fails, where communications are cut, where supply lines are broken, because we assume everything will go wrong. That seems pessimistic, an officer said. It is realistic, Chris corrected. Earth taught us that nature does not care about fairness. A hurricane does not stop because you are unprepared. A predator does not give you time to reload. You either adapt or die. Humans spent 200,000 years learning that lesson. Stood slowly. His massive frame towered over those around him. I am beginning to understand something. My species, they have always been the strongest. We developed weapons to match our strength. We never had to think like you do. Because you never had to, Chris said. You were born with natural advantages. Humans were born with almost nothing, so we learned to create advantages through innovation. We became arrogant, continued. We assumed our way was the only way, that superior force was the answer to every problem. It is not arrogance to use your strengths, Chris said, but it becomes a weakness if you cannot adapt when those strengths are not enough. Admiral activated his communicator. I want to share something with all of you. I requested information from Earth's military academy before this session. The display changed to show test scores and statistics. These are comparative results between human cadets and coalition cadets across various metrics. The crowd leaned forward to read the data. Physical endurance testing. Humans outperform 80% of coalition species. They can march longer, carry heavier loads, and maintain combat effectiveness while wounded or exhausted. The statistics continued. Pain tolerance. Humans rank in the top 5%. They can continue fighting with injuries that would incapacitate most species. Tactical adaptability. Human cadets excel at improvisation. When their primary plan fails, they quickly develop alternatives using available resources. Weapons maintenance. Human soldiers can disassemble and repair their weapons under combat conditions, often with minimal tools. Was staring at the display in shock. We never tested for these metrics. We focused on technology and firepower. Because your species never needed to think about endurance and adaptability, Chris said gently. Have telepathy and advanced technology. You solved problems through superior intellect and communication, but humans could not rely on special abilities. We had to rely on determination and flexibility. An older instructor from a species Chris did not recognize stood up. I fought in the border wars 30 years ago. I have seen what happens when superior technology meets determined resistance. Technology does not always win. That is the core of human military philosophy, Chris said. Technology is a tool, not a guarantee. A weapon is only as effective as the being using it. And the most important weapon is not the rifle or the ship or the armor. It is the mind of the warrior. He picked up his rifle again. This is a tool, a very effective tool designed through centuries of refinement. But without the training, the discipline, the mindset to use it correctly, it is just metal and magnets. Amy joined him at the front. Human military training emphasizes decision-making under pressure. We teach soldiers to think tactically, to analyze situations quickly, to work as a team. The weapon is important, but the person holding it is more important. Chris gestured to the rifle. Every part of this weapon represents a lesson learned through failure. The magazine design came from soldiers who died because they could not reload fast enough. The scope adjustment came from snipers who missed critical shots. The trigger mechanism came from warriors who needed precision under stress. This weapon is built on the bodies of humans who fought and died learning what works. The room was absolutely silent. No one moved, no one spoke. That is the difference between human weapons and energy weapons, Chris concluded. Energy weapons were designed to be powerful. Human weapons were designed to be reliable under the worst possible conditions, by people who expected those conditions to happen. Approach the podium. Instructor, I would like to request formal training in human weapons and tactics. Me as well, added. Within moments, dozens of cadets and officers were standing, requesting the same thing. Admiral's skin showed bright yellow, which Chris had learned meant satisfaction. I am making human weapons training mandatory for all cadets, effective immediately. Furthermore, I am recommending to Coalition Command that human military advisors be assigned to all major bases. Chris nodded respectfully. I will do my best to teach anyone willing to learn. As the crowd dispersed, many beings approached to ask questions or request private consultations. Chris answered each one patiently, explaining concepts and principles. Near midnight, only a few people remained. Was one of them. I have been a warrior my whole life, they said quietly. I thought I understood combat, but you showed me today that I have been fighting with one hand tied behind my back. How so? I relied only on my strength and my people's weapons. I never thought about adaptation, about planning for failure, about learning from those who are different from me. Chris smiled. Then the lesson today was worth it. The strongest warrior is not the one with the biggest weapon. It is the one who can learn and adapt. Extended his massive hand. Chris shook it, feeling the incredible strength in the alien's grip. Teach me, said. Teach me to think like a human warrior. 3 weeks had passed since the demonstration. The Galactic Military Academy looked different now. Everywhere Chris walked, he saw cadets practicing with human weapons. The firing ranges ran 24 hours a day, filled with beings from dozens of species learning kinetic warfare. The Advanced Human Weapons course had become the most competitive class at the Academy. 50 cadets from 20 species had been accepted after rigorous testing, and were among the top students. They had thrown themselves into the training with determination that impressed even Chris. This morning, Admiral had called Chris to his office. The news was unexpected. A combat exercise, Chris said, standing before the Admiral's desk. Mixed teams. Yes, skin showed confident purple. I want to see how well your students have adapted human tactics. They will face a team using traditional coalition methods. Who will lead the opposition? Commander, he is an instructor, very experienced, 40 years of service. He has refused to attend your classes. The Admiral paused. He believes human tactics are being overvalued. Chris understood immediately. He wants to prove that traditional methods are superior. Precisely, and honestly, Lieutenant, I need to know the truth. If human tactics only work for humans, that is important information. But if they can be taught to other species effectively, that changes how we train our entire military. What are the exercise parameters? Capture a fortified position. The position is defended by automated systems. No lethal force but pain simulators will be active. Losing team faces academic consequences. When? 5 days from now, choose your team carefully. Chris left the Admiral's office and found Amy in the engineering lab. She was teaching 3 cadets how to modify power cells for use in human weapon systems. "We have a problem," Chris said. Amy looked up from her work. "What kind?" "Commander is challenging the effectiveness of human tactics. Combat exercise in 5 days." Amy set down her tools. "The one who has been complaining about humans since we arrived." "The same." "Well, this should be interesting," Amy thought for a moment. "Who are you taking on your team?" "You, obviously, and 3 others who have shown the best tactical understanding." "Against his hand-picked team of elite cadets." "Yes." Amy grinned. "I will get my gear ready." That afternoon, Chris assembled his team in a private training room. Besides, he had chosen 3 cadets from different species. Each one had demonstrated not just skill with weapons, but the ability to think flexibly under pressure. "You all know about the exercise," Chris began. "Commander will have 8 cadets with the best energy weapons and shields in the Coalition arsenal. They will use traditional tactics, standard formations, overwhelming firepower." "What will we use?" asked one of the cadets, a flying species with feathered wings. "Strategy over strength, adaptation over firepower, and most importantly, teamwork that uses each of your natural abilities in ways they will not expect." Raised his hand. "Instructor, I know, he trained me 5 years ago. He is brilliant at conventional warfare. His formations are textbook perfect." "Textbook is predictable," Chris said. "That is his weakness." For the next 4 days, they trained constantly. Chris taught them guerrilla warfare tactics, ambush positions, suppressive fire, using terrain for advantage instead of fighting in open ground, everything that humans had learned fighting against superior forces. Proved especially valuable. Her telepathy allowed her to create a silent communications network between team members. They could coordinate without speaking, without radio signals that could be intercepted. Amy worked with the equipment, making modifications that would give them unexpected advantages. She installed sensors that could detect energy weapon signatures from farther away than standard systems. She created portable barriers that could deflect plasma fire. Contributed his knowledge of tactics. Will use his strength to push forward aggressively. He believes in winning through superior force. He will expect us to defend the objective. "Then we will not be there when he arrives," Chris said. On the morning of the exercise, both teams assembled at the starting area. Stood with his 8 cadets, all equipped with top-tier coalition weapons. Plasma lances, energy disruptors, shield generators. They looked like they could conquer a small planet. Chris's team had human rifles and basic equipment. They looked under-equipped by comparison. Approached Chris with a superior expression. "Lieutenant, I respect what you have taught these cadets, but today you will learn that experience and proper equipment defeat clever tactics." "We will see," Chris said calmly. "I have fought in 12 campaigns across 8 worlds. I have led warriors into battle for longer than you have been alive. Your Earth tactics might work against wild animals, but not against trained soldiers." "Commander, I am not trying to prove you wrong. I am just trying to complete the objective." His expression hardened. "When I win today, you will stop filling these cadets' heads with primitive ideas. The Coalition has advanced beyond your planet's crude methods." He returned to his team without waiting for a response. Amy stood beside Chris. "He really does not like us. He feels threatened. His entire identity is built on being the experienced warrior. We represent change, and change is uncomfortable." The exercise director activated the communication system. "Teams, you have 60 minutes to complete the objective. Capture the fortified position and hold it for 5 minutes. Pain simulators are active. Begin." His team immediately moved forward in a standard formation. Shields in front, heavy weapons in the middle, scouts on the flanks. It was perfect textbook execution. Chris's team did not move toward the objective at all. "What do you sense?" Chris asked. The closed her eyes, extending her telepathic awareness. "They are advancing directly on the main path, confident. They expect to find us defending the position." "Good, everyone to your assigned positions." The team split up and moved to locations Chris had scouted during preparation. They were not at the objective. They were along the routes would use to approach it. 15 minutes later, team reached the fortified position. It was empty. Automated defenses had been deactivated remotely. His voice came over the exercise communication channel. "Where are you? Are you surrendering?" "We are completing the objective, Commander, just not the way you expected." His team spread out to search. That was when Chris gave the signal. His team opened fire from 3 different directions simultaneously. Kinetic rounds struck from concealed positions. Shields held, but the surprise attack forced his team into defensive positions. "Fall back and regroup," ordered his team. They retreated in good order, shields protecting their withdrawal. Chris's team did not pursue. Instead, they relocated to new positions. "He will adapt now," said through the telepathic network. "I know how he thinks. He will change his shields to kinetic defense." "Let him," Chris responded. "Amy, are the EMP rounds ready?" "Ready," Amy confirmed. Advanced again, this time with his shields reconfigured. He moved more cautiously, scanning for ambush positions. When Chris's team fired, the kinetic rounds were stopped by the adapted shields. "Your tricks will not work twice," announced triumphantly. Chris switched magazines to EMP rounds. The next volley struck the shields and detonated. The electromagnetic pulses disrupted the generators, causing the shields to flicker. In that moment of weakness, standard rounds from other team members struck 3 of cadets. Their pain simulators activated, marking them as casualties. They fell back, eliminated from the exercise. Was down to 5 warriors against Chris's full team of 7. "Clever," admitted, "but I still have enough force to overwhelm you." He split his remaining team in 2. 3 would continue the main advance, while 2 would flank from the east ravine. It was a solid tactical decision that should divide Chris's attention, but had predicted this exact move. "The ravine," said through the telepathic link. "He will use the same flanking maneuver he taught me." Chris sent Amy and 2 cadets to the ravine. They set up a triggered obstacle that would block the passage. When his flanking team entered the narrow space, Amy activated the trap. Large foam boulders tumbled down, simulating a rock slide. The 2 flanking cadets were caught and eliminated. Was now down to 3 warriors, including himself. Chris had all 7 team members active. The exercise should have been over, but was not a 40-year veteran for nothing. He regrouped his remaining 2 cadets and set up a defensive position. From there, he could force Chris to assault a fortified enemy, which would cost casualties. 20 minutes remained in the exercise. Chris needed to capture and hold the objective, just needed to prevent that. "He is stalling," observed. "Yes, smart move. He knows we have to come to him eventually." Chris considered the situation. "But he made one assumption, that we need to eliminate his team to win." "Do we not?" "The objective is to capture the position and hold it. It says nothing about eliminating defenders." Chris smiled. "We just need to keep him too busy to contest us." He split his team. 4 members would engage position, keeping them pinned down. The other 3, including Chris himself, would circle around and occupy the objective from a different direction. The plan worked perfectly. While fought to defend his position against what he thought was Chris's main force, Chris slipped past with a small team and reached the objective unopposed. "Objective secured," Chris announced. 5-minute hold timer starting. Realized his mistake too late. He tried to assault Chris's position, but now he was attacking uphill against defenders. His 2 remaining cadets were eliminated by concentrated fire. Himself almost reached the objective, but stepped into his path. The massive warrior faced his former instructor. "I learned from you, Commander," said. "You taught me strength and honor, but instructor taught me when not to use them." His weapon was larger and more powerful, but was in a superior position with cover. When fired, was already moving. When advanced, retreated to better ground. It was a masterful display of tactical thinking over brute force. The timer reached 0. Chris's team had won. The exercise director's voice announced the results. Exercise complete. Mixed team victory. Time of hold 5 minutes exactly. Stood in the middle of the field, breathing heavily. His weapon lowered slowly. He looked at Chris with an expression that was hard to read. Then he did something unexpected. He approached and offered his hand. "I was wrong," said simply. "I thought experience and firepower would be enough. You taught these cadets something I never could. You taught them to think beyond their own assumptions." Chris shook his hand. "You are a great warrior, Commander. Your tactics work, but my students learn to fight against great warriors. That is the difference." "Will you teach me?" Chris smiled. "I would be honored." That evening, the entire team gathered for the debriefing. Admiral attended personally. "What you demonstrated today changes everything," the Admiral said. "Traditional coalition tactics assume superior technology and firepower, but you won with inferior equipment through superior strategy." "We won because our team adapted," Chris corrected. "Noose tactics provided communication, Amy prepared our equipment, everyone contributed their strengths." "That is the lesson," Amy added. "Human tactics are not about humans being special. They are about using what you have effectively, regardless of what that is." Admiral nodded slowly. "I am recommending major changes to coalition military training. Human tactical doctrine should be taught at all levels." Stood, "Instructor, Commander has requested a rematch, but this time he wants to be on your team." The room erupted in laughter. Chris grinned. "Tell the Commander he is welcome, but he has to pass the basic course first. No shortcuts even for veterans." Later, as the team dispersed, approached Chris quietly. "I understand now what you meant about the toy gun," she said. "What is that?" "It was never about the weapon itself. It was about what the weapon represented, a species that refuses to accept limitations. That keeps innovating and adapting no matter what obstacles appear." "Exactly," Chris said. "The rifle is just metal, but the thinking that created it, that is what matters." Smiled, a rare expression for, "My people thought we were advanced because we had telepathy and technology, but we became stagnant. We stopped learning because we thought we knew everything." And now, the arena was filled to capacity. Every cadet, every instructor, and every officer stationed at Zenith 7 had come to watch. What started as a training exercise had become something more. It was a test of philosophies, old versus new, tradition versus innovation. Chris stood at one end of the arena in standard human combat gear. His M9 Gauss rifle hung at his side. He looked calm, almost relaxed, as if this were just another day at the range. At the other end, Commander towered in full battle armor, 8 feet of muscle and natural plating, enhanced by the best defensive technology the Coalition could provide. His plasma lance hummed with barely contained power. 40 years of combat experience showed in every movement. This had been idea. After the exercise 3 days ago, he had requested single combat, leader versus leader, not to prove superiority, but to understand the difference between knowing tactics and living them. Admiral had approved, seeing value in the demonstration. The exercise director's voice boomed through the arena. "Standard dual rules, non-lethal settings, pain simulators active. First to score a confirmed hit wins. Combatants ready." "Ready," Chris said. "Ready," rumbled. "Begin." Opened with a plasma blast aimed at Chris's center mass. It was a shot that would have vaporized an unarmored target instantly, but Chris was already moving before pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt scorched the ground where Chris had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. Chris fired 3 quick shots at its armor. The rounds struck and ricocheted off, but they forced the commander to adjust his stance. Chris was not trying to penetrate the armor with those shots. He was testing responses, gathering information. Charged forward, using his massive size and strength to close the distance. In close combat, his advantages would be overwhelming. Chris could not match in hand-to-hand fighting and knew it. But Chris had no intention of fighting on terms. He moved laterally using the terrain features of the arena. Support pillars, equipment crates, uneven ground, everything became part of his strategy. His weight and momentum made quick direction changes difficult. Chris exploited that ruthlessly. In the observation stands, watched intently. He whispered too, "Look at how moves. He is not trying to overpower, he is making strengths into weaknesses." How asked. His armor is heavy. His weapon is powerful but slow to aim precisely. Is using speed and position to negate those advantages, like a smaller predator against a larger one. On the arena floor, fired again. Another miss. Chris was already behind cover, repositioning for his next move, snarled in frustration and pursued. That was exactly what Chris wanted. He led into an area with loose gravel underfoot. When the commander charged, his weight caused him to slip slightly, just enough to throw off his timing. Chris used that moment to circle around behind him. Spun, bringing his lance to bear, but Chris had already moved again. Though was fighting an opponent he could not pin down, could not corner, could not bring his superior strength against. Amy watched from the control room with the exercise director. Is getting angry. That is dangerous. For Chris, the director asked. No, for anger makes you predictable. In the arena, paused his assault. He was breathing heavily, not from exhaustion but from frustration. He planted his feet and activated his shield generator. The energy barrier sprang up around him, glowing faintly blue. If I cannot hit you while chasing, I will make you come to me, announced. I can wait here all day behind the shield. Chris lowered his rifle slightly. That is a valid tactic, Commander, but you made one assumption. What is that? That I need to get close to you. Chris switched magazines smoothly. He raised his rifle and fired at the shield, not at himself. The round struck the barrier and detonated with a flash of white light. EMP rounds. His expression changed to shock as his shield flickered and died. The generator sparked and went dark. He had seen this trick 3 days ago, but he had not expected Chris to use it in single combat. Shields are effective until they are not, Chris said calmly. Humans learned to defeat every defense we encountered. Switched tactics immediately. He charged again, this time in a zigzag pattern to make himself harder to hit. It was a good adaptation, but Chris had been waiting for it. He fired not at, but at the ground in front of him. The round exploded on impact, kicking up dust and debris. His vision was momentarily blocked. When he cleared the dust cloud, Chris was no longer where he had been. The commander stopped and scanned the arena carefully. His sensors detected heat signatures from multiple directions. Chris had set up thermal decoys while moving, confusing the tracking systems. Nodded in the stands. He planned this from the beginning. Every move was designed to create this situation. Admiral sat forward in his seat. I am seeing something I have never seen before, a human fighting on equal terms. Not equal, corrected quietly. Is bigger, stronger, better armed, and better armored, but is still winning. How? Because he expects to fight superior opponents, so he does not fight fairly. On the arena floor, made a decision. He could not find Chris through sensors, so he would flush him out. He began firing plasma bolts at every cover position, destroying crates and barriers systematically. It was a sound strategy. Destroy all cover and Chris would have nowhere to hide. But each shot drains power cells. The plasma lance had maybe 10 more shots before needing to recharge. Chris knew this. He counted each shot fired, waited for the right moment. When the commander turned to destroy a barrier on the far side of the arena, Chris made his move. He sprinted across open ground to a new position, one had already cleared. The commander spun at the movement, but his lance was pointed the wrong direction. By the time he could aim, Chris was behind cover again. 8 shots left. Growled and fired at Chris's new position. The barrier exploded into fragments. Chris rolled out before the plasma hit, coming up in a firing stance. 7 shots left. This continued for 3 more volleys. Chris would move, would fire, Chris would already be gone. The commander was being led into a trap he could not see. 4 shots left. Amy smiled in the control room, just realized what is happening. Indeed, the commander had stopped firing. He stood in the center of the arena, lance ready but not shooting. You are counting my shots, waiting for me to run empty. Yes, Chris admitted from behind cover. It is a simple strategy. You have 4 shots left before your power cells need 40 minutes to recharge. I have 60 rounds left in my magazine. So you wait for me to become defenseless, then shoot me without honor. Chris stepped out from cover, rifle lowered. No, Commander, I would never claim victory that way. That would teach nothing. He set his rifle down on the ground and drew a combat knife from his belt. Standard issue human blade, 8 inches long. The crowd gasped. Chris had just disarmed himself against a fully armed and armored warrior. Stared, what are you doing? You wanted to understand human tactics. This is the final lesson. Even without superior weapons, without armor, without advantages, a human soldier keeps fighting. Chris walked forward into open ground. 4 shots, Commander, use them well. Could have ended the match right there. 1 plasma bolt and Chris would be down. Instead, the commander set his lance aside and drew his own blade. It was massive, more like a sword than a knife. I accept your terms, human, blade against blade. They circled each other slowly. His reach was far greater. His strength could shatter bones. His armor would stop Chris's knife from penetrating. Chris had one advantage, speed and precision. Struck first a powerful overhead slash. Chris and let the blade whistle past. He countered with a quick strike at its wrist joint where armor plates connected. The knife scraped along the gap but did not penetrate. The backhanded with his free arm, an attack that would have broken ribs if it connected. Chris ducked under it and rolled away, coming up at a new angle. They exchanged blows for 2 minutes. Every time used his strength, Chris used timing to avoid it. Every time Chris struck at an armor joint, adjusted to protect it. In the stands, the crowd had gone completely silent. This was not just combat. It was a conversation in violence, each fighter teaching the other through their actions. Feinted high and struck low. Chris saw it coming but could not avoid it completely. The blade caught his leg, cutting through his uniform. Pain simulator activated. Chris stumbled but did not fall. First blood to me, said. Chris's response was immediate. He threw his knife. Not at, but at this discarded plasma lance. The blade struck the power cell connection. Sparks flew as the lance's power system short-circuited. And first objective denial to me, Chris replied. Your lance is disabled. Even if you defeat me in blade combat, you cannot use it again without extensive repairs. Looked at his ruined weapon, then back at Chris. Then he began to laugh. It was a deep, booming sound that filled the arena. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, he lowered his blade. I yield, Lieutenant. The crowd erupted in confused noise. The match was not over. Chris was wounded and disarmed, still had his blade and armor. Chris limped forward. Commander, you do not have to yield. You can still win this fight. No, I cannot. Removed his helmet and looked Chris in the eyes. Because winning this duel would teach me nothing, but yielding to you teaches me everything I needed to learn. He addressed the crowd in a voice that carried to every corner. I challenged Lieutenant because I believed my experience and strength were superior to his tactics. I was wrong, not because he is stronger than me, but because he thinks 3 steps ahead while I think 1. Turned back to Chris. You disabled my weapon knowing that even if you lost the blade fight, I could not claim a clean victory. You turned your weakness into my problem. That is what humans do. They turn every disadvantage into someone else's crisis. Chris retrieved his knife and rifle. Commander, you are one of the finest warriors I have ever faced. Your skills are exceptional, but you were trained for battles where you had advantages. Humans are trained for battles where we have none. Teach me to think like that. I will, but first let the medics check your power cell connections. I hit it pretty hard. The arena cleared slowly as cadets and officers discussed what they had witnessed. Admiral approached both warriors as the medical team worked on their minor injuries. That was the most instructive combat I have seen in 30 years, the Admiral said. His skin showed colors Chris had learned meant deep respect. I am recommending to Coalition Command that human tactical doctrine be implemented fleet-wide. 6 months later, the changes were evident across the entire Coalition military. Human weapons training had become mandatory at every level. More importantly, human tactical thinking had spread throughout the officer corps. Coalition forces held war games incorporating the new doctrines. The results shocked senior command. Mixed units using human tactics outperformed traditional units by significant margins, not because human weapons were better, but because human thinking created unexpected solutions. Species that had mocked humanity now requested human military advisors. Earth's military academy established exchange programs with 40 different worlds. Human instructors taught across the galaxy, spreading the lessons learned from 200,000 years of survival on a death world. The M9 Gauss rifle became standard issue for many coalition units, not replacing energy weapons, but supplementing them. Soldiers learned to choose the right tool for the situation rather than relying on a single superior weapon. But the real change was deeper than equipment. The coalition military began to value adaptability over raw power, tactical thinking over technological advantage, teamwork that leveraged individual strengths rather than forcing everyone to fight the same way. Chris stood in the same lecture hall where he had first taught, but the audience was different now. These were instructors from across the galaxy, learning from him so they could teach their own people. He held his rifle and spoke to the assembled beings. This is not just a weapon. It is a reminder that intelligence, adaptability, and determination can overcome any advantage. That is humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not our guns, but our refusal to stay down when struck. He set the rifle on the table. We come from a world that tried to kill us for 200,000 years, predators that were faster, whether that was deadlier, diseases that should have wiped us out. We are still here because we learned one critical lesson. You do not have to be the strongest to survive. You just have to refuse to quit. The instructors listened intently. These were not cadets anymore. These were experienced warriors and teachers who had seen combat across dozens of worlds, and they were taking notes like students. Human tactics are not about being human, Chris continued. They are about being flexible, about planning for the worst, about using what you have instead of wishing for what you do not have. Any species can learn this. Any warrior can apply it. Stood at the back of the hall. He had completed the advanced course and was now a certified instructor in human tactical doctrine. He raised his hand. Yes, Commander. How do we teach this to species who have never faced real adversity, who have always had superior technology or natural advantages? Chris thought carefully. You teach them to imagine losing those advantages. What would they do if their shields failed, if their weapons ran out of power, if they were outnumbered? And that is where human thinking begins, in the place where defeat seems certain. Added from her seat near the front, my people had to learn this the hard way. We thought our telepathy made us superior. But when we faced enemies who were telepathically shielded, we had no backup plan. Human doctrine taught us to always have a backup plan. And a backup for the backup, Amy said from the podium beside Chris. Humans plan redundancies into everything because we assume the first plan will fail. An older instructor from a species Chris still struggled to pronounce stood up. Lieutenant, I fought in the border wars. I lost many good warriors because we relied too heavily on our technology. If we had known these tactics then, they might still be alive. Chris nodded respectfully. That is why we share these lessons now, so fewer warriors die learning them the hard way. The session continued for hours. Questions about specific scenarios, discussions about how to adapt human tactics to different species' strengths, debates about which traditional methods should be kept and which should be reformed. As evening fell over Zenith 7, the instructors filed out to begin implementing what they had learned. Chris packed his materials, the same rifle that had started this whole journey sitting in its case. Approached with several other graduates of the program. Instructor, I am shipping out tomorrow. Assignment to the Coalition cruiser Valor's Edge as tactical officer. Congratulations, that is an important position. I requested it specifically. I want to put these lessons into practice on a real warship. Paused. I wanted to thank you before I left. When you first arrived, I thought you were primitive. I laughed at your toy gun. I was arrogant and foolish. You were confident in your training. That is not the same as foolish. But I did not know what I did not know. You taught me that there is always more to learn, always a better way to approach a problem. That lesson is worth more than any weapon. Chris shook the Massive's hand. Use what you learned well, protect your crew, adapt to whatever challenges you face. That is all any warrior can do. After left, Chris found himself alone in the lecture hall. He walked to the front window that looked out over the station. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species lived and worked here, learning, growing, preparing for whatever threats the galaxy might bring. His communicator chimed, a message from Earth. The military academy wanted him to return and train a new generation of instructors. The demand for human tactical expertise had exceeded all expectations. But there was also a request from Admiral. The coalition was forming a new rapid response force, incorporating the best elements of human and alien warfare. They wanted Chris to help design the training program. Amy joined him at the window, headed home. Eventually, but there is still work to do here. The rifle that broke their arrogance, Amy said, looking at the weapon case. That is what they are calling it in the lower ranks. It was never about the rifle. I know, and they know that now too, but symbols matter. That rifle represents the moment the coalition stopped assuming they knew everything. Chris smiled slightly. A toy gun that became a symbol. Earth would find that funny. Earth should be proud. We brought something valuable to the galaxy. Not just weapons or tactics, but a way of thinking that makes everyone stronger. 6 months became a year, then 2 years. Chris remained at the academy, training instructors and refining the tactical programs. The coalition military transformed slowly but thoroughly. Human doctrine was not imposed, but integrated with existing knowledge from dozens of species. The results spoke for themselves. Casualty rates in combat exercises dropped by 40%. Mission success rates climbed. Most importantly, warriors from different species learned to work together effectively, combining their unique strengths instead of competing. Sent regular reports from the Valor's Edge. His crew, once skeptical of the new human tactics, had become believers after successfully repelling a pirate raid using guerrilla strategies. 3 ships against 12, and they had won without losing a single crew member. Had returned to her home world to establish a training center. She combined telepathic abilities with human tactical thinking to create something entirely new. Her students were revolutionizing how telepathic species approached warfare. Commander continued teaching at the academy. He had become one of the strongest advocates for human methods, precisely because he had opposed them initially. His classes were famous for their intensity and their focus on adaptability. And throughout it all, that rifle sat in its case. Chris still used it for demonstrations, still taught cadets how to maintain and fire it, but more often now he talked about what it represented. Not human superiority, not technological advancement, but the simple truth that any being from any world could overcome obstacles through determination and creative thinking. The toy gun that alien cadets had laughed at became the foundation for a new era. One where the galaxy's greatest assets were not weapons or ships, but the lessons learned by a species that spent 200,000 years fighting to survive on a world that tried to kill them. Chris stood in his quarters one evening looking at a photo from Earth. His family, his home, a blue and green world hanging in space, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. He raised a glass in silent salute, to Earth, to humanity, to the refusal to accept defeat that had brought them from caves to the stars. And to the galaxy that was learning, slowly but surely, that strength comes not from advantages you are born with, but from what you do when those advantages are not enough. The toy gun that broke their arrogance. It was a good story. But the better story was what came after, when arrogance gave way to respect, and respect gave way to cooperation, and cooperation made everyone stronger than they had been alone. That was humanity's true gift to the galaxy. Not weapons, not tactics, but the understanding that every species, no matter how humble their beginnings, has something valuable to contribute. And sometimes, the species that seems the least advanced teaches the most important lessons of all. Now I see that true advancement is not about what you have. It is about what you do with it and whether you can keep growing. Chris nodded. That is worth more than any weapon in the galaxy. I will teach you to think like a survivor, Chris said. That is what humans are. We survived Earth, and now we will help the coalition survive whatever comes next. Amy smiled. They are going to have their minds blown. Good, Chris said. That is exactly what they need. He closed his eyes and slept without dreams. Tomorrow would be interesting.